¿Qué tal amigos y amigas del proyecto Grado Cero? Nos encontramos aquí en la Ciudad de México. Un saludo a los colegas de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. El día de hoy nos encontramos con Miguel López-Lorenzo. Él es profesor del King College of London en Inglaterra y pues él está con nosotros gracias a un seminario en torno a Ronald Dworkin titulado Derecho, Moral e Interpretación que organizó el Instituto de Investigaciones Jurídicas. Es una manera de homenajear a este importante filósofo y pues hoy estamos contigo, Miguel. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes. Well, first of all, talk us about what is the importance of the knowledge that Dworkin do. What is the importance of the ideas he put on the discussion and what we have to do now? He gave us ideas, but what we have to do now?
Okay. Well, I think there are a couple of ways of approaching that question. The first thing to say is when you look at influential philosophers working in all sorts of areas and over long periods of time, what you notice is that they offer two things. They offer interesting ideas, but perhaps more importantly, they introduce interesting questions. Okay, and what you find when you look at philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, through to Kant, and through to H.L.A. Hart in the question of legal theory, what you find is even if you disagree or don't find the actual answers to the questions convincing or not entirely as you might like them to be, what you do find increasingly influential is the way in which they approach their subject matter, and they constructed the discipline in many ways. So along with Hart, I think one of Dworkin's most important contributions to jurisprudence is giving us so many things to think about and so many problems which we have to work on. So perhaps a more concrete example of that is perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Ronald Dworkin's jurisprudence is, as he says in Justice for Hedgehogs, it's one big thing. It's integrated to so many different projects. It involves us to take a substantive view on all sorts of questions in which law may figure. So, to take one example, for Dworkin, law is a department of political morality. And in that very idea alone, we have so many things which we have to reconcile. We have to try and find out what is law's specific place in political morality. How does it relate to other political values such as liberty, equality, democracy, and finding law's distinctive place within that overall framework of values by which we govern our political life. And that's a huge project, and it's one we owe Dworkin a lot for in terms of bringing clarity in terms of what needs to be done and how we go about doing it. So that leads to the other part of your question in terms of, well, what needs to be done? Well, one thing, if you look at the papers across this conference over the last 2 days, what you find is a broad sort of strategy being adopted. You find people agreeing with the basic fundamentals of Dworkin's program, but disagreeing about how that program best proceeds. And one way in which you go about doing that is to integrate certain aspects of an alternative perspective on law, say for example in thinkers such as H.L.A. Hart and Joseph Raz, to try and incorporate those insights with the basic framework which Dworkin put forward in Law's Empire in great detail. So to summarize, I think the influence of Ronald Dworkin's jurisprudence is twofold. It lies in interesting ideas, but more importantly on important questions, giving us a sense of what needs to be accomplished. And I think what needs to be done is to incorporate those insights with genuine insights from an alternative perspective of law, which we'll discuss more when we get to my paper, because that's nicely related to that.
Yes, the main debate of jurisprudence, the classic ones, is the law and morality.
Okay.
And we can see that Dworkin accepts some morality on law, but can really we think a law without morality, or we have to accept some connections with that morality?
Okay. Well, that all depends on your starting question, and it all depends what you're hoping to, or what problems you're trying to address when you do jurisprudence. So for me, the central question in jurisprudence is to ask, what makes a proposition of law true. So we can say the law requires you to drive at this speed limit. We can say it requires you to make your contract in writing. It can demand all sorts of things. The most general and important question in jurisprudence is to ask, well, what makes that true? Why is it? How does it happen that the law comes to require and make you do certain things? Okay, so that's what I call the constitutive question. What makes a proposition of law true? What makes it the case that the law requires what it does? The relationship between law and morality that you find in Dworkin's work emerges because of the need to respond to that question. Because really, suppose for example you were to take the view that moral considerations do not feature in an answer to the constitutive question. It's not clear how you'd go about answering that, because enacted statutes, decided cases, other sources of law are ultimately descriptive facts about what people have said and done. They don't create standards in and of themselves. You need to appeal to considerations of political morality in order to explain how, why, and in what way those facts create an impact on the law. And that's what Dworkin was trying to get at when he was talking about disagreement in law. Because much like Kant before him, it's a transcendental inquiry. The question is not to say, oh, lawyers are disagreeing and positivists can't account for that. That's a short-sighted way of understanding his project. What he was trying to say was, what must law be in order for this phenomenon to be possible? And if all law is are ultimately descriptive facts about what people have said and done, how is it possible to disagree about it? The reason why it's possible to disagree about it is that it's contentious, because it's laced through with moral considerations about the impact of those descriptive facts about what people have said and done. So in sum, I'd say the reason why we can't conceive of a demoralized or non-moralized account of law is because it doesn't help us answer the central question at work in jurisprudence, as I understand it.
Okay, you gave a lecture in the UNAM named Moralized Conventions in Law. This was at the seminar, Dworkin seminar.
Yep.
We talked about this when we started the interview. But what was the main ideas you want to debate on this paper?
Okay. Well, Ronald Dworkin has always been resistant to the idea that what law is and how it works is in some sense the product of a convention, okay, or of conventions among judges in particular. Okay, that's the thesis he attributed to H.L.A. Hart before him, and much of his work has been trying to expose the problems with that kind of view of the nature of law. So I find myself in something of a difficult position. On the one hand, I accept the basic framework that Ronald Dworkin lays out about what jurisprudence is about, what it should be, and the sorts of questions we should be answering. But I also believe that in H.L.A. Hart's work there is an important insight, namely that what law is largely determined by a conventional practice by judges and other officials. So the main idea is to try and show how we can make space for that view of law within an interpretivist or Dworkinian framework. And it's a difficult project because it's not clear why, if you think law is a department of political morality, why a convention among officials would have anything to do with the morality that we identify with law, okay, or the type of morality that law is, okay? And what I tried to do was try to show that the reason why we think that, or the reason why we're resistant to that idea, is because often we have a certain view of what conventions are, yeah? And I think that we understand conventions in the wrong way most of the time in the literature. What we have in mind is a non-moralized practice. What most people have in mind by a convention is the idea that, well, it's just a practice, it's just what people are saying and doing, but whether morality's got anything to do with it is a separate question. I don't believe that. I believe that whether somebody has a convention, and whether a convention obtains among a particular group, is entirely dependent upon moral considerations. What those moral considerations do, more specifically, is they explain what it is about our practice and the reasons why people engage with that practice that generates a standard. And I think you can extend that to the legal domain and thereby try and integrate these two different perspectives on the nature of law. That's the basic idea that I tried to articulate in the paper today.
Well, this you do an interesting work because I think you're right when you say, well, people do conventions, but the fundament of the conventions sometimes are moral ideas.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to some people think that it isn't. They say no, the convention has no morality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we return to the first question, no, that the law and morality has an interconnection, and we have to understand that we cannot think law without these elements like morality.
Yes.
Now we can see that the last 40 years was a strong debate between Hart and Dworkin about this kind of topics and other in the jurisprudence. What do you think is the actuality of this debate?
Okay. So yeah, the interesting question which you're raising is what turns on the debate? What is it about? How do we make further progress and try to understand it? Well, there are two things I want to say in response to that. The first is, one of the things I like about my paper is I don't say the word or mention positivism in the entire paper, right? So in 20 pages I managed to have this discussion without mentioning the thesis positivism. And one of the reasons why I do that and why I think it's important is because we can get hung up on the debate of whether law is a moralized notion or whether positivism is right and that moral considerations don't have any role to play in understanding the nature of law. That to me seems like a separate question. A more foundational question is, how does law work? Never mind whether it's moral or non-moral. Yeah? That matters as long as we get the right answer to the constitutive question. Okay? So this is related to conventions. Okay? So the prevailing view is that if you appeal to conventions, you must be positivist. The only reason why you would appeal to conventions is because you're positivist. But once we say, well, positivism, non-positivism, I'm not interested, what are conventions? Do conventions have a role to play in understanding law? Then we can ask the question, well, does this advance positivism or not? But we need to separate between philosophy of law should be about law, not about positivism, right? And the idea is to get the nature of law as well understood as we possibly can. And if that turns out positivist or otherwise, so be it. But apart from the history of political thought, perhaps, I don't think anything turns on the debate of whether law turns out to be moralized or non-moralized. I think what matters is that we use these discussions to try and make progress on understanding law. And some questions that are relevant here are, okay, so is law the product of convention? Or is law the product of authority? Or is law a department of political morality? These are all different questions. These are all important questions that we can ask and make progress on without raising the question of whether positivism is right. Okay, because when you start the debate in that way, you get into certain discussions which don't seem to me to be very helpful. Who cares if positivism is right? If Hart's got an interesting view of law, which I think he does, then I think we should examine that and try and see where it leads, independently of whether it defends a positivist thesis about the nature of law or otherwise.
Now, we can see some authors, some scholars talk about we have to continue to dialogue about the topics that Hart and Dworkin debates what's about. But what we have to do right now with these topics, not with the personal debate, with the topics that they can't resolve. They ask questions, they put some ideas, but the discussion is alive today.
Well, there's two things to say there. One is to say the debate matters because they raise the right questions. Yeah? So we use the debate as a way to make progress, but that doesn't mean that our goal is to settle the debate. Okay? So many people, for example, don't think the debate is very helpful. They think that we should abandon the debate in order to make further progress. But that's still too easy. Yeah? Because there are many issues that have been left unresolved. So let me try and give an account of that. From Hart, we want to capture the idea that law is a distinctive kind of institution. Okay, we want to capture the idea that it's a contingent thing. It's not a natural part of the universe. All right, it depends on human action, and it depends on human beings doing things in a certain way. So law is a cultural phenomenon. It's one of the most amazing things that human beings have created as a way of governing themselves, and we have to take that humanistic approach towards it in order to understand it. So that's one message that we get from Hart. But on the other hand, we also have to capture from Dworkin the side of the debate which proceeds in this fashion, right? To say, well, law is also a good thing, yeah, and it's also an important thing for us, morally speaking. Okay, we use law, and law acts as a justification for all sorts of coercive enforcement, all sorts of things which make a demand on people's practical reasoning. Okay, now where I'm coming from, and where I think a lot of people are coming from, is that we needn't pick and choose between these two perspectives on the nature of law. It's too easy to do that, and it's also too easy to abandon the challenge of integration. The challenge is to try and find a way, because they both seem to cut across each other. And I think that there are certain tools which can explain that. I think there are two tools. Okay, one is conventions, as we've already discussed, and the other is the idea of authority, which is prominent in the work of people like Joseph Raz and his students. Okay, I think those are the two main ways in which you can go about integrating it. What you would basically do is argue that there are either conventions in the legal domain, or that legal institutions are the products of we can understand law as the product of authoritative directives. Okay, and that both of these have moral significance, and we need to draw on accounts of political morality to explain why they have that role in the legal domain. It's a big task, but I think those are the two main live options to pursue in trying to engage in this task of reconciling the insights from Hart on the one side and Dworkin on the other.
Well, for to end this interview, I want to ask you, what was your experience living the seminar? You participate giving a lecture, but all the scholars who give the seminar have a discussion. They put his idea on the table. They feel okay with some ideas. They well with others. Right. What's your personal experience, and what it's next about these topics?
Okay, well, whenever you engage in a philosophy of law type seminar, there are good points and bad points about it. Okay, the good points are that nothing can be taken for granted. Okay, in keeping with the spirit of the subject, you have to try and justify your starting points. You have to try and justify your inferences, and ultimately provide a good support of your central thesis. This is not common in other subjects, for example, or at least to the extent in some disciplines we can take certain things as granted and then engage in the hard issues that evolve in terms of how we apply them. Say, yeah, but philosophy is not like that. We start, nothing is taken as given, and everything has to be bolstered in an intuitive way. So that's a good experience, and I think we saw that in abundance in the conference that we've had over the last 2 days. I think the more specific lessons to learn are from this conference are that there are many Dworkins, and there are probably as many Dworkins as there are many readers of Dworkins, but that doesn't undermine his influence or what we have to learn from him. And in actual fact, it probably advances the case for the idea that his work is of continuing relevance. Okay, what we have to try and do, I think what we're all involved in, is trying to make Dworkin's contribution to jurisprudence as sound as they can be, and to put them on their strongest footing, as he might say, to put it in its best light. And I think that's the lesson to be taken from the conference, and that we still have much work to do.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation, and we want to see you soon here in Mexico City.
Let's come back.
And see you soon, your new works and the new areas you want to debate.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to it. It'd be great to come back again.
Thank you very much.